Hello and welcome. I'm Andy Serwer, editor-in-chief of Yahoo Finance, and I'd love to welcome you to our first Election 2020 special presented to you in conjunction with HuffPost and Yahoo News. Well, we're 42 days away from the end of voting, I guess what we used to call Election Day. And in the weeks between now and then, we will be exploring things like the impact of the coronavirus across American society, the economic upheaval that the virus has brought, and how the movement for social justice has changed the conversation on the campaign trail. But today, we are focused on the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the future of the Supreme Court, her legacy, and the battle to replace her. I'm joined today, as I will be each week, by my co-host, Yahoo News editor-in-chief Dan Kleidman, and HuffPost Washington bureau chief Amanda Turkle. Good to be with both of you.
Good to be with you, Andy.
Let's start with the front and center question. And Amanda, I'll go to you first, which is, how has the passing of RBG changed the campaign?
I mean, just when you thought 2020 and the campaign couldn't get any crazier, you throw this Supreme Court battle right into the mix in the final weeks. In some ways, I think the coronavirus is still going to be the main issue. But this also just sort of, underscores the intensity around this election. You now have Democrats saying that they are more motivated than ever to make sure that Biden wins, whether it's to try to stop Republicans from pushing through a nominee in a lame duck session, trying to push Biden to add more justices to the Supreme Court, maybe some other structural reform. And you have conservatives, too, who say, this is also shows the importance of keeping the presidency, because look how much Trump has been able to do in getting conservative nominees to the court. And, this RBG nomination shows that. So, you just have so many possibilities of ways this could affect it, including, is there going to be a contested election that could go to the Supreme Court? And now this looks pretty good for Trump if that happens.
Dan, what about you on that top question?
Well, first of all, Amanda's right. This is there's no question that this nomination, this vacancy, has fired up voters on both sides. I think the short answer is we don't know yet for sure the extent to which this is going to have an impact on the presidential election. For one thing, Supreme Court nominations usually get activists in both parties and the bases really excited. One thing we do know about this election is that the bases of this party, of both of these parties, are as fired up as we've ever seen them. So it remains to be seen whether this will have a real impact on voters. Swing voters are not necessarily going to be as swayed by something like this as the activists in the party would be. And the early indications from the polling is that so far this has not changed much. But it is still early. There'll be a lot more data that will come in. One thing that I was really struck by yesterday was Joe Biden was in Wisconsin giving a speech. He spoke for 30 minutes. He did not mention the nomination, and not a word. Didn't even mention Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And to me, that suggests that he understands that this is a big issue in Washington. It is a big issue for some parts of the parties, but it is not necessarily going to sway the parties. And he wants to stay focused on coronavirus, which is where he will be stronger.
And we've been talking about the presidential race, but I think one area where it will affect the election is in these Senate races. You have people like Susan Collins, who obviously took a lot of heat after she voted for Brett Kavanaugh. You have other endangered Republican senators, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Cory Gardner in Colorado, and some others. They are going to be feeling a ton of pressure because they're in these states that are a little bit more moderate. They want to sometimes show their distance from Trump. And so how this will affect the Senate races and whether it will, I think that is perhaps a more interesting story.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just to make one very quick point on this, Andy, which is that there's also a Democrat Doug Jones in Alabama, in a very conservative state, and he was already an underdog. But if he is forced to vote against a Trump nominee, that could be the death knell for him. To the contrary, there's someone like Steve Daines, the incumbent senator in Montana, the Republican, who is going to be talking about this nomination over and over again because it ties him to Trump, and it's gonna help him with voters in Montana.
And speaking of President Trump, I mean, he weighed in on this, Dan, obviously already. Here's what he had to say just the other day about this particular issue.
We won, and we have an obligation as the winners to pick who we want. That's not the next president. Hopefully I'll be the next president, but we're here now.
Yeah, here now, indeed. And I think it's intriguing just to go back to the Senate race, Amanda, to the Senate races, I should say, and the senators, I should say, actually more precisely. Were you surprised that Mitt Romney came out in support of doing a vote?
No, not at all. I mean, Mitt Romney, sometimes Mitt Romney is anti-Trump. And he doesn't like Donald Trump that much. And so sometimes he's sort of branded this resistance hero, and Democrats like him until he becomes what he is again, a conservative Republican. Many Republicans like having Trump in office simply because he has done what is most important to them, which is push through conservative nominees. And so it is not at all surprising that Mitt Romney, a solid Republican, is excited that another conservative justice will be able to be on the Supreme Court.
Okay, much more to come here as we go to break. When we come back, we'll be joined by John Ward of Yahoo News to talk about whether we're going to see a new Supreme Court justice before Election Day. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're joined now by Yahoo News senior political correspondent John Ward. John, welcome. You've been covering the action on Capitol Hill since Friday with regard to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What are you seeing right now?
Writer David French, who put it pretty well on over the weekend, that there was this shudder that went through the political class, kind of in a bipartisan fashion, because in a already divided and fractious year, people realized that there was going to be this other huge strain placed on our political system. And so I think for Democrats, there was, heartbreak and a bit of panic over the weekend. I think some of that has settled a little bit, in speaking to some folks on Capitol Hill on the Democratic side today. They were telling me they feel like their initial reaction was this could really do damage to Joe Biden's chances by kind of changing the channel, changing the conversation away from a focus on the COVID-19 crisis and on Trump's handling of that. I think, as Amanda was saying earlier, though, and Dan, they're realizing as they look at some of this polling data, which it is still early, but they're realizing that so many people are so activated and energized and engaged in this election that it might not have changed as much as they had thought.
John, you've got some reporting that we were talking about earlier in the day that Mitch McConnell may have signaled to Donald Trump which way he thinks the president ought to go. And in addition to that, I understand a sense from the people you've been talking about, from some Democrats, that maybe they ought to be lowering the temperature a little bit in this battle, particularly in as far as they would be going after, say, Amy Coney Barrett if she gets the nod.
Yeah, I was told that Mitch McConnell spoke to the president over the weekend and basically suggested to him that he thinks Amy Coney Barrett is the best choice. The person I spoke to wanted to stress that McConnell was not opposing the other people, but simply kind of saying he thinks Barrett is the best choice. And there are a few reasons for that. She's already been through a nomination battle in 2017 to her spot on the Seventh Circuit, a federal judgeship. And that was fairly contentious. And so she's been stress tested, in the words of one person I spoke to. And there's also the element of her religious faith. She's a very devout Catholic, and she has an interesting background. She was some of her formative years in the faith were with a group in South Bend, Indiana, called People of Praise, which is a very conservative, very devout, and uncharacteristic for sort of charismatic Christian circles, pretty highly educated group of Christians, and that's unusual for sort of a more Pentecostal approach to the faith. I just want to stress that. And so she got some questions from Senator Dianne Feinstein in 2017 that were interpreted by Republicans as attacks on her faith itself. And so that's sort of the way that Republicans see that a Barrett nomination could play out. They could use questions, much less criticisms of Barrett's faith, to try to tap into the sense among a lot of conservative Christians that they're being persecuted and attacked for their faith. And so there's that element, and there's also the element of retribution for the Republicans blocking Merrick Garland in 2016 and then pushing this nominee through in such short fashion, so close to an election, which is a huge flip flop by Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and other Republicans. And so there is a reckoning. I spoke to one Democrat who said basically, look, if we're going out there and saying that we're going to, no matter what, if they do this, that we're going to add Supreme Court justices to the court, pack the court, and abolish the legislative filibuster, what if we lose? What if we lose the presidential election? And what if we don't get control of the Senate? What if Mitch McConnell is still majority leader in 2021? We've just given him a green light to go ahead and do those things himself and give a potential second-term President Trump 2 more Supreme Court justices. So there's a sense on the impact electorally, hey, may not be as bad, and and I think that plays into the sense of maybe we don't need to go so hard in our public communications.
Yeah, John, a lot of political calculus, and of course, you were mentioning Mitch McConnell. He really is kind of the person in the catbird seat, and people hanging on his every word with this particular issue. Here's what he had to say recently about this.
The next justice could fundamentally alter the direction of the Supreme Court and have a profound impact on our country. So of course, the American people should have a say in the court's direction.
Amanda, I want to bring you in and get your take on Mitch McConnell's strategy and what your thinking is here.
I mean, Mitch McConnell has the power and he's going to use it. And you can charge him as a hypocrite, but he doesn't really care because this is what he wants to do is nominate, get conservatives on the Supreme Court and on all the federal courts, the lower courts as well. So I guess, today, John, I want to ask you about this. There were some questions about whether Susan Collins would actually vote against Trump's nominee if it came before the election, because she said she didn't want to, but it wasn't clear she said she would actually say no. But today she clarified, she said, look, I will oppose this person. I mean, John, what's your sense? Does her saying that, does that seem clear that McConnell has the votes lined up? She has the room to come out and say that? I mean, are there any other Republicans who seem like Democrats could maybe pick off, aside from Lisa Murkowski, who put out a similar statement?
Yeah, I think your point about Collins getting room to be as independent as possible, and that signaling that McConnell has the votes is probably a good one. I mean, I think I was actually a little surprised. I know you weren't about Mitt Romney's announcement this morning, but I think outside of the two, Murkowski and Collins, and then Romney, I have been skeptical that there would be any possibility of a fourth Republican senator in the first place. The only person I can really think of that might even have a chance of opposing a vote before the election would be Tom Tillis in North Carolina. I just don't think Cory Gardner and Martha McSally, I just don't see the calculus there for them if we're just going to be, see it through the eyes of a cynical political consultant or politician, because I think both of them are likely to lose, and both of them want to run for office in the future. And if they want to retain support from, Republican voters in these states, I think this is a litmus test vote to support a vote before the election that actually kind of transcends Trump in some ways, which I think is what you were saying, Amanda, about why Romney, came out the way he did.
So, John, no question that McConnell has the votes. He controls the process. He controls the timing. The Democrats don't have any procedural tricks up their sleeves here. The only remaining question I have is, will they be able to get this done before the election? Is that a fait accompli now, or is there any chance that that it'll slip until past the election, which could change the complexion somewhat, make it harder, even though they'll still likely get a nominee through?
Well, I mean, McConnell today said he thinks they can get it done before the election. I saw one Twitter, thread that kind of laid out the calendar logistics of it. I think the only thing that could potentially throw a wrench in this is if something comes out about the person that the president names, whether it's Coney Barrett or someone else, something comes out of the woodwork that throws a wrench into this. That could be something that delays this, obviously. And then if they have confirmation hearings, before the election to get to a vote, which would be an obvious part of the process, if those hearings don't go well, if something happens that dramatically changes things that could delay the vote. And I did want to say, if you do get to a vote after the election in a lame duck Congress, there's several different scenarios. But if President Trump were to lose to Joe Biden, I think the interesting thing to watch then is which Republican senators are up for re-election 2 years from now. You have Marco Rubio in Florida, you have Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, you have Rob Portman in Ohio, and you have a couple others. And so, you would want to watch whether Trump won or lost those states for these Republican senators who are up for re-election in 2 more years, because I think that might play into their calculus for how they might vote in a lame duck.
All righty, John Ward, Yahoo News senior political correspondent. Thanks so much for joining us.
No problem.
Up next, we'll look at the nightmare scenario that keeps election lawyers up at night. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back. We're now joined by HuffPost reporter Paul Blumenthal. Paul, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to ask you about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her passing and the potential impact on a contested election. How are those things connected, Paul?
Well, we're headed into an election where Donald Trump has said that he can't lose unless it's a rigged or fraudulent vote. And he says this without any evidence, of course. But what this means is that he could wind up challenging, say, whether certain absentee ballots should be counted that come in after Election Day or that need to be counted because they come in late on Election Day. And what this means is this could go to the court system, could go to the Supreme Court. And with a 5-3 court, 8 total justices, that could wind up in a 4-4 tie potentially. So, I mean, this has already come up among Republicans who use this point to say that's why we need to appoint a justice before the election. But of course, the same number of justices were in place in 2016 before the election, where Trump was also saying that he could only lose if there was a rigged, fraudulent election. So, I mean, the lack of a fourth vote, especially on the liberal bloc, is a big deal for what could be another potential Bush v. Gore type situation.
Hey, Paul. So, let's pretend that for some reason, it doesn't make it up to the high court. It makes it up to the high court, but it's a 4-4 split still because Trump doesn't get his nominee through in time. Trump has put so many other judges on the federal bench. And so can you talk about, what are his chances if, it gets kicked back down to one of the lower courts or something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what would happen, say, if Chief Justice John Roberts, who's viewed as the swing justice on the Supreme Court, decides to side with the liberals, put this into a tie. What would happen is it would uphold whatever the next lower court ruling is. So that would be an appellate court, which would matter, every region of the country has a different appellate court. And so many of them under Trump, and thanks to Mitch McConnell, have been packed with Republican conservative justices. And I mean, this really changes the dynamics, and it really highlights how important Trump's presidency has been to people like McConnell and the conservative legal movement in installing judges. That, McConnell held these seats open by filibustering them, putting holds on them and blocks under Barack Obama's presidency. And now they're filled with Trump nominees. Trump has appointed more appellate court judges than any president that were for the judges that are currently serving. So he's appointed, almost twice as many as Obama did during his 2 terms.
Paul, it's Dan. I don't want to get too wonky on the law here, but I do want to drill down a little bit. What you're saying is that if there is a 4-4 tie, then the whatever appellate court kicked it up to the Supreme Court, it comes back to them, and whatever they decided is controlling law for the whole country. So at that point, you have an appeals court that really represents a very small part of the country making this decision about the United States election. Is that possible? I mean, is there nothing at that point that Chief Justice Roberts could do? Can the court reach down and I mean, how does that get resolved?
Well, you'd think that perhaps the Supreme Court would decide to resolve that by not moving to a 4-4 tie. They can decide to have a different decision there. I mean, obviously, an appellate court for a particular region of the country deciding the presidency would, be very difficult to handle for this country at this moment, especially considering how contentious elections are right now, especially this one.
And I think it would be, from Chief Justice Roberts' view, kind of disastrous. Someone who's an institutionalist who wants to protect the reputation and the strength of the Supreme Court. So what a crazy scenario that would be.
I mean, it would be an unprecedented, crazy scenario. I mean, even if we don't move to that scenario, the current one that we have, where a justice is going to be appointed before the election, a 6-3 conservative majority, where Donald Trump is saying that he wants this appointee before the election because they will stop the ballots from being counted. So, I mean, even just the normal scenario is pretty crazy.
Hey, Paul, Dan earlier on mentioned that Joe Biden did not seem too keen to seize upon this as an issue. However, he did weigh in a few days earlier. So let's take a listen to what Vice President Biden had to say about this issue.
There is no doubt, let me be clear, that the voters should pick the president, and the president should pick the justice for the Senate to consider. This was the position of the Republican Senate took in 2016 when there were almost 10 months to go before the election. That's the position the United States Senate must take today.
And I wanted to ask you, Paul, I mean, if Mitch McConnell puts forth, say, Amy Coney Barrett, and she is confirmed, and therefore you have a full 9, and you have a contested election, I mean, that's another scenario that could very easily play out, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, what I was just saying is a 6-3 conservative majority where John Roberts is no longer the swing justice. You have 3 appointees made by Donald Trump. Donald Trump likes to call his judges my judges. He has a view of the court and his appointees and people that he has put into positions of power that they owe him something. He talks and acts a lot like a mafia boss in this manner. And he has explicitly said that he wants to put this person on there before the election so that they will stop the ballots from being counted. So he does not want every vote to be counted in this election. He wants to win by stopping the counting of ballots, hoping that he has enough to win counting only on election day and not any ballots that might be counted afterwards.
All right, HuffPost reporter Paul Blumenthal, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman will join us to discuss how the new court may or may not change the healthcare system. Please stay tuned. We're now joined by Yahoo Finance senior columnist Rick Newman. Rick, the justices are set to hear another Obamacare case on November 10th. What are they considering at this point?
Yeah, this is kind of a complicated case. So Obamacare, as the ACA is known, it did survive one trip through the Supreme Court. It did not get struck down. Obviously, it's still in effect. So what happened this second time around is in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was the big tax cut bill the Republicans passed at the end of 2017, that eliminated the penalty fee for people who did not abide by the individual mandate. So it used to be if you did not have insurance, then you had to pay a penalty fee. So Congress zeroed that out. And the argument that the Attorney General made of Texas is more or less this. That by lowering that to zero, that used to be considered a tax. The Supreme Court ruled on that a few years back. But when it goes to zero, it's no longer a tax. The Texas Attorney General said, therefore, if it's not considered a tax, the individual mandate itself is completely invalid. And if that part of the law is invalid, then the entire Affordable Care Act is invalid. A lot of legal experts at the time thought this was pretty flimsy legal logic. Nonetheless, it has made it all the way through the appeals process, and the Supreme Court is going to hear it on November 10th, as you pointed out. So, the last ruling on the ACA was 5-4 in favor of upholding the ACA, with John Roberts as the swing vote. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was another one of those, the majority votes, and of course she's gone. So, in theory, the court could tilt away from supporting the ACA and rule against the law, either invalidating part of it or invalidating all of it when this decision is likely to come probably next June.
So, Rick, you mentioned that this case, a lot of legal experts, and I've seen even conservative legal experts say that this case is pretty flimsy, but still it's making its way, it's at the Supreme Court. What do you think the chances are that maybe some other Republicans besides Roberts could rule against this? I've seen some people mention Brett Kavanaugh, perhaps. What do you think the chances are of that?
Yeah, so because of other rulings Brett Kavanaugh has made, there's some belief that maybe he would actually vote to knock down this lawsuit. And it would not survive. And of course, now we don't know who the ninth justice, who now, if Kavanaugh were to vote to uphold the ACA, we don't know which way the ninth justice would go. I mean, there are some other factors to consider here. This is basically the Texas Attorney General basically found a technicality that Congress could fix this in the simplest legislation that ever went through the legislature. I mean, and if Democrats take the Senate, I think that's very likely to happen. So it's this simple. If Congress were to simply raise the penalty fee, which is now zero, so the individual mandate still exists, they could eliminate the individual mandate. That would solve the technical problem. It would basically torpedo this entire lawsuit, rendering it moot. They could also leave the individual mandate and raise the penalty fee to something like $1. If they raised it from $0 to $1, well, once again, then it would count as a tax, and this whole thing would be moot. And there's some other things they could do. I mean, this is just basically a seam in the law. The Texas Attorney General kind of went for a Hail Mary pass, and they got to like the 3-yard line so far. So there are a lot of things that happen. Of course, Congress is not going to pass any of those laws unless Democrats control both Congress and the White House. But that's how simple this would be to fix if you really just wanted to fix the ACA and leave it in place.
Rick, I think we can be pretty confident that neither of the presidential candidates are going to be speaking as eloquently as you just did about the legal and policy intricacies of the ACA. But in some small ways, this Supreme Court vacancy offers a little bit of a silver lining for the Democrats, doesn't it? Giving Joe Biden the opportunity to talk about health care and talk about the possibility that a lot of people could lose their health care.
I think you're right, Dan. And there's also one other thing that we haven't mentioned, which is that the Trump administration actually has filed a brief in favor of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. In other words, they are still, Trump is still trying to kill the ACA. So Joe Biden can say without exaggeration that Donald Trump is still trying to take health care away from the 20 million people who get it under the ACA, who would not have health care otherwise. So I think you're right. And we know from 2018 in the midterm elections, healthcare was a big issue. Arguably, healthcare is an even bigger issue now because the pandemic recession. So people are scared about public health to start with. People who are losing their jobs, many of them are losing their insurance. I don't think we have good data on that yet, but it only stands to reason that the more people who lose jobs, the more people are going to lose employer-provided care. And of course, Joe Biden has a very detailed healthcare plan, which involves a new public option for people who cannot get insurance otherwise. He also wants to lower the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 60 and shore up the ACA. Those are basically three planks of his healthcare plan. So if he plays it right, I think that's a pretty, pretty strong message for voters to hear.
Well, you guys are right. Joe Biden has been talking about the ACA, and it'll be interesting to see how much he talks about it in the days between now and the old election day. But here's what he said recently about the ACA.
Millions of Americans were voting because they know their health care hangs in the balance. In the middle of the worst global health crisis in living memory, Donald Trump is before the Supreme Court trying to strip health care coverage away from tens of millions of families.
I don't know about tens of millions. I mean, we know that the number, I suppose you could come up with some technicalities that explain the tens of millions. But Biden, I mean, he's effectively right there. And one of the things I've always wondered is what would happen if the Republicans actually got their wish and they were able to repeal the Affordable Care Act? It would be like the dog that caught the car. And now what do you do? How do you've been telling people this is this evil law for all these years, but suddenly you have to explain to 20 million people what they're supposed to do to get coverage some other way. And the other important thing that's in the ACA is the prohibition on discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions. So Trump keeps saying he would take care of it. Trust me, I'll come up with my own pre-existing condition plan. He has not done that. Trump does not have a health care plan, by the way. He has said many times he's going to unveil one over the summer. He said he would show everybody his healthcare plan by the end of August. The only thing he's got on healthcare is there are 7 bullet points on the Trump campaign website saying things like lower prescription drug prices and lower the cost of healthcare, with no details on how Trump would do that.
Yeah, Rick, I was going to ask you about Trump's healthcare plan that was supposed to come out by the end of August. I think today, Kayla McEnany, the White House press secretary, said that this healthcare plan is real and it will be coming out very soon. Do you think that Trump is going to come out with any healthcare plan before the election? And do you think that Republicans just really want to avoid talking about healthcare and making this more of an election about healthcare?
It's a losing issue for Republicans because look what happened when they tried. They had a vote to repeal Obamacare in 2017 and they failed, and everybody blames that on John McCain. But again, what would they have done? Where would they stand in 2020 if they had actually been able to repeal the ACA? I mean, there's almost no chance they would have been able to provide coverage for all the people who lost it. There are a couple of Republican bills that would, in an alternative way, address the pre-existing condition problem. But I think nobody in America wants to go back to the days when insurance companies could charge you 4 times more or 10 times more, or just deny you coverage altogether if you've had cancer in your past, or if you had a heart attack or some other condition, diabetes. The Republicans just don't have a good explanation for what they would do if the existing law were repealed. So, my guess is Trump will come up with something by, maybe midnight on November 2nd. Before the last people vote. But the obvious question voters should ask is, why are you doing this at the very last minute of your first term? Why didn't you do something before now?
All right, I think Dan and Amanda would agree that nobody knows the ACA like Rick knows. Rick, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Linda Hirschman to discuss the legacy of Justice Ginsburg. Welcome back. We're now joined by Linda Hirschman. She wrote a book called Sisters-in-Law about Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, the first two women to serve as justices on the Supreme Court. Linda, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I guess the top line question to you would be, what is Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy?
I think her legacy stems from sort of unexpectedly, since she was so famous as a justice, but I think her legacy stems from her years at the ACLU between 1970 and 1980, when she basically flipped the 14th Amendment and got the Supreme Court to say that the 14th Amendment applied to sex discrimination. 10 years before she started her crusade in 1971, the Supreme Court had ruled the exact opposite. They had said that the 14th Amendment explicitly does not apply to women, to sex discrimination. So to achieve that kind of change only 10 years after the prior precedent was laid down was amazing. And I think that's her major legacy, equality for women under the Constitution.
Linda, one of the things that we've heard people say about Justice Ginsburg in that phase of her career is that she was enormously strategic, that she understood the huge challenges she was up against, arguing in front of 9 male justices, for example. Talk a little bit about what her approach was and that kind of strategic side of her.
Well, she followed the example of her mentor, Thurgood Marshall. The NAACP had gradually brought about constitutional protections against race discrimination by bringing small, not too threatening cases at the beginning and establishing the precedent and then building on the prior precedent to make bigger social change as you went along. And that's exactly what she did. So she started out with a little tiny case that I always say probably didn't affect anyone other than the 2 individuals involved in the litigation. It was about an obscure provision of Idaho testamentary law. And the law specifically said, we have no basis for this, but we choose the man over the woman to administer estates, basically. And she got the court to say, you can't discriminate on the grounds of sex based on nothing. You have to have a fair and substantial reason for doing it. That was a small change that affected very few people, but it was set in motion the engine of precedent and constitutional precedent. And then the next time she asked for a bigger change in military benefits, and the time after that she asked for a very big change in the provisions of the Social Security law for widowers in addition to widows. So that was her strategy, and it worked brilliantly. If you look, I looked at all this archival stuff when I was writing my book, and if you look at what the justices said to each other and to their clerks when they were looking at the later, much bigger cases, you actually have Justice Powell and Justice Stevens say, we would never have ruled in favor of equality in this case, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg has tied our hands.
Linda,
Brilliant.
Could you talk more about how, there have been so few women on the Supreme Court, how the women who have been on the court have supported each other and helped each other? And do you expect that to continue with Trump's nominee? He says he's going to pick a woman, but it seems like whoever he picks will be far, far more to the right than any woman who has ever served on the court.
So the doctrinal distance between Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who served for the longest time together on the court, was nothing like the chasm that will separate any Trump appointee from the other women that are serving on the court now, the other 2 women. O'Connor was pretty conservative, and she did not vote with Ginsburg on a lot of things. But when it came to women's issues, they voted for the woman, with one exception, every time it came up in the 12 years that they sat together. So there was a real sense of camaraderie on that subject. And the world has changed exponentially since the Republicans put Sandra Day O'Connor on the court in 1981. I say she was past her sell date when they put her on, because the polarization that we've been talking about this hour had already started to happen when she went on. She was the last product of a different era.
And so just, we don't know the nominee yet, but you don't think, based on the names that are out there, that we will see this nominee possibly voting with the other women on issues of women's equality as a voting bloc anymore?
I think it's unimaginable. The America has changed constitutively in the last 20 years, and it's absolutely unimaginable.
Linda, I want to touch on another facet of Justice Ginsburg, and that is the whole pop culture RBG phenomenon. I mean, there's certainly no other Supreme Court justice has produced this kind of following in this way, and really not many other politicians at all even. And where does this come from? What does it mean? And did it surprise you?
It did not surprise me, because I was watching the revival of the feminist movement happen anyway, right? I mean, I am from the original 20th century feminist movement, and we had a long backlash period, but I could see it was reviving in 1,000 ways, especially the new technology. So what happened was a very canny LGBTQ person, Shana Konishnik, deployed the new technology, it was a Tumblr page, to create the personam of the notorious RBG. And it was a political movement. It captured the rising tide of the revived feminist movement perfectly, like the Pink Pussy Hats and like the Me Too movement, which was also very much a product of the new technology. There was a new feminism rising, and these young women like Shauna and Erin Carmon, who wrote the notorious book with her, were coming online, and they had been the products of women's studies classes, and they had been reading Catherine McKinnon and Samizdat, and so they were ready to burst out, and she gave them a perfect example. One of them said to me when I was doing the research for my book about it, she was so old and still so radical. They were really looking for that. She filled that position perfectly, and they were right. She was still so radical.
Linda, one of the things that all of the tributes and appreciations have said about Ruth Bader Ginsburg is that her life, her professional life, reflected the evolution of women in the law. Of course, when she got out of law school, she couldn't get a job. She couldn't get a clerkship. I think she was rejected by Felix Frankfurter, who thought that she looked very good on paper, but couldn't bring a woman into her chambers. And then she became a secretary. But through the force of her intellect and drive and personality, she ended up on the Supreme Court. In terms of her legacy and what she did for women and the law, where are women right now at this particular moment? There have only been a small number of women on the Supreme Court. They are, I don't know how well they're represented as partners in law firms today, but is there anything close to equality or not yet?
There's not. And it shows the fact that culture changes very slowly. And I always say most slowly when it comes to gender relations, because you cannot move to the suburbs and get away from your wife. So there is a tremendous amount of resistance to sex equality on the ground. And you see that in the law firms, which have only something like 17% female partners, even though women have been graduating from law schools in larger numbers than men have for decades. So it's a very, very slow process. The decision that forbade sexual harassment in the workplace was handed down by the Supreme Court in 1986. And yet we found Harvey Weinstein, right, doing it 25 years later with very few consequences until the revived feminist movement and the new media began to change the culture. So it's slow, but because the law changed and said that sexual harassment was illegal in 1986, when the culture is ready to change, it has something to hang its hat on. So the new order had these precedents, and Gretchen Carlson, who actually started it by suing Roger Ailes, had a lawsuit against him because the law forbade it, even though the culture wasn't enforcing it. So it's very slow. But I think that young women are going to surprise your political pundits who preceded me and have a real impact on this election. I think the fact that this beloved political iconic figure, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is now on the table, so to speak, is going to bring a lot of these young women who, being young, normally don't vote in large numbers to the polls. So that's a long answer to a short question. Mm-hmm. But I think that's her legacy for the future is not just the constitutional revolution she engineered, but the way that she instantiated and represented the revival of the feminist movement with these new young women coming along.
Great. Linda, that's some great insight. Linda Hirschman, who wrote the book Sisters-in-Law about Justice Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned for some final thoughts from our panel right after this. Welcome back. Before we go, Dan and Amanda, what are your thoughts, your final thoughts here? What are you looking at over the next 6 weeks before the election when it comes to the court? Amanda?
Sure. I mean, conservatives, I'm going to be just watching how this affects the election and turnout and enthusiasm. Conservatives have typically been more interested in the courts and made it more of an issue. But I think now what Trump is doing, RBG's death, Democrats are going to feel like the courts are more and more important, and that could carry through not only to this election, but going forward.
Dan?
Yeah, I think I'm going to end where we started. I think at the presidential level, the polls have been remarkably consistent, and I don't think this is going to have a huge impact on the presidential race. I do think it will have impact in the Senate races. Whether it's enough to be decisive in terms of who gains control of the Senate, time will tell.
All right, Dan Kleiban and Amanda Turkle, thank you so much. We will be back next week, same time, same place, to look at the impact of the coronavirus on American society in the election, and also preview the first debate coming up next Tuesday, the big debate. Until then, stay safe, everyone.